science. I can hear, oh, I can hear. Think I'll go where it suits me.
Hello and welcome to episode 267 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and we're back for another episode within Supergiant Games Month at Retro Encounter. Transistor is the subject, and the first panelist is Eva Padilla.
Heyo.
And the second panelist is Alana Hagues.
Hey, everyone.
And I definitely finish in third today. But, Transistor. This is a 2014 game by Supergiant Games. It has a no-clip documentary about it, like we mentioned in the previous episode on Bastion. And I played this game for the first time pretty soon after it came out, and I think this might be a common refrain because I remember talking to it about I remember talking to Rob Steinman about this 5 years ago or something. I sort of had difficulty connecting with it and couldn't get into it, but tried again earlier this year. It was on a sale. I played it in April or May, and then really, really liked it, and I'm happy to revisit it for the podcast. So, did either of you have a similar experience? Starting with you, Alana. What were your what's your background with Transistor, and what were your early impressions of it?
Yeah, I actually have a similar background to you. So I picked it up on PS Plus back in, I think, 2015 or 16. It was on PlayStation Plus for 1 month, and so I downloaded it because everything about this game should have appealed to me. And I played it for 20 minutes and dropped off of it for some reason. I don't know why. And that kind of put me on, like, I think I said on the Bastion episode, like, Supergiant have always been a studio that have really interested me, and then, like, not clicking with Transistor, it was like a blocker had come up, and I was like, well, great, these are games that I'm supposed to admire but never love. And so I didn't come back to it until now, and I'm happy to report I was wrong. Transistor is fabulous. I fell in love with it very quickly and had a very, very visceral emotional connection to it very quickly. So yeah, I'm delighted I've managed to get my way through it this time. I've still got like hiccups with it, but like, yeah, it's a step up from Bastion for me.
All right, interesting. And Eva, I think you played Transistor before this year, right? What's your background and feelings on it and early impressions?
Yeah, so I did play it pretty recently. It was at like the end of 2019, I think it was. And I had known about this game shortly after it came out. I had multiple friends who, when it came out, said, you have to play this game. Like, this is definitely something you're going to love. And so I said, okay, I'll pick it up on Steam. So I did, and didn't play it for 4 years. And I never even touched it. And then I saw it on a sale on Switch and picked it up. And as soon as I played it, it was like, this is one of my favorite video game experiences I've had. I adore.
Oh my!
I really loved it. And happy to report that I did another playthrough, just a few days before recording this, and I was planning to just dip my toes in, not really get too deep into it. But boy did I, and I just did a whole nother playthrough with it. And I thought it was fantastic. Even better than the first time.
All right. Now, I want to revisit something. I had a very similar experience to Alana. I got this game shortly after it came out on Steam because I loved Bastion so much, and I wanted to support them, and this game looked super cool. But I played it for, I don't know exactly how long, definitely less than an hour before dropping it and not revisiting it until earlier this year. But I think I have a theory on why that's a bit of a recurring story. Like, I didn't quite connect with the beginning of Transistor. And I think it probably because the gameplay is not as immediate as Bastion, and not really immediate in general. Because I mean, you have a stamina meter, and you can't just simply mash an attack and have it and like do that endlessly. So because of that, like, just the act of walking up to enemies and trying to whack them over and over, which you can do in 95% of action games, doesn't exactly work. Like, this game wants you to be more deliberate and make more choices even in just the moment to moment action. And I think that's not because of that lack of immediacy. There's a bit of a steeper learning curve with this game than Bastion or similar action games, or just a lot of or isometric action RPGs. And for that, I think that early barrier is part of why people don't connect to it as easily. Am I blowing smoke, or is there some merit to that idea?
I would agree. I was wondering if all of these are kind of isometric top down, but this feels like the camera angle is a lot closer to something like Diablo, whereas Bastion's is a little bit closer. But yeah, like my immediate thought was going into combat, and also you only start with one attack, don't you?
I think you start with two. Don't you start with the one close range, and you start with Crash and Breach, or is it just Crash?
Yeah, it might be both, or you might get Breach like very quickly.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, it did feel like a bit of a steep learning curve for me, and you do get like most of your tools pretty quickly, apart from all of the all of the attacks. I can't remember the exact name.
Functions,
yeah. But yeah, certainly the turn system, like I was so used to looking at it like it was a top-down action game that I kept forgetting early on, hang on a minute, I can use the turn system, which is essentially what it turns it into, like a top-down strategy / like you can plan all your moves ahead of time, and I kept forgetting you could do that early on. So yeah, the combat was the blocker for me 4 years ago, and it's probably the thing I have the most problems with overall, but we'll get into that as we go along, I think.
Yeah,
I think I want to say I had a couple really stupid deaths. Like, I just tried to whack something to death, and then I was out of meter and then straggling, and then I died in an early encounter, and I'm like, well, I don't like this game anymore. But if you sort of understand that they want you to use functions chained together, almost like you're writing a computer program, or balancing an equation or something. But like once you figure out that combat is supposed to be deliberate and sort of wrap your head around the function system, I think it's like after that it's all downhill and the game just becomes really fun. But Eva, you probably just are smarter than Alana and I, and figured this out much more quickly.
Well, no, once it really, luckily, it's a short game, and so it's not like I was 40 hours in and then I figured out how to turn.
Right.
But it's once you it clicks with you that this is sort of this spontaneous XCOM sort of affair. I really love that part of it. It reminded me of, when we were just talking about this, it reminded me of that scene in The Incredibles when Mr. Incredible is fighting the one of the robots and throws out his back, and then the robot's like stretching him out, and then it actually sets his back into place. And he starts laughing and just takes it apart. And that's what it felt like when I was playing this game. I was like, gosh, I'm really struggling with this. Why am I struggling so much with this? And then once I really got the turn, it was like, yep, just set my back into place. Now this is amazing. And that's, it was pretty much just that from then on with it, and just how it works thematically. I think I love how that all works together.
Yeah,
right, yeah.
That's his fight against the second to last version of the robot on his first visit to No Man is an Island. And yes,
I trust you to remember that.
Yeah. The name of the island is No Man is an Island. I love The Incredibles. But anyway, I'm a bit of a Pixar junkie / scholar in general. But
I want to jump in actually to something you said, Eva, and also go back to NoClip, because there's a fairly lengthy discussion about the combat in the NoClip documentary on Transistor. It was probably easily the thing that the team had the most difficulty with, because they were playing around with the function system, and correct me, there's 16 functions, and you can mix and match them between different slots. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit.
Let's do it. There's I'm not sure how many functions there are. 16 sounds right, but their slots can be active, upgrade, or passive. And so every function, when you put it in an active slot, it's an ability. When you put it in the passive slot, you get some kind of passive bonus. That's sort of connected to the active slot. And its upgrade slot is you attach it to a different function in a different active slot, and it gives properties to that other function. So you get a bunch of these, but they can be equipped in different ways. And whenever you level up, you can choose between one of two new functions, or open up another slot, or increase some base stats. I think maybe is that right? Like I think one of them is like increasing meter size. So there is choice and customization with every level up and every new tool that you get in your toolbox, and it's conceptually it's awesome. I think it's a little bit less straightforward than Bastion, so it took me at least some time to get my head around it. This isn't a criticism, but Transistor has a learning curve that you need to sort of master before it feels right.
Definitely, yeah. Like 16 functions is quite a lot when you can you consider all the customization options. I know they were toying around with like 60 at one point, and I was thinking, oh my word, can you imagine 60 different functions and stuff? But I think
that would have been overwhelming.
I think the cool thing is the way that they do, the way that they managed to make it turn-based and active. And I think when the turn system actually clicked in for me is when you get a certain loadout. One thing they brought up in the No-Clip documentary is kind of I think we all do this with action RPGs, and I think that's the wording that Amir roughly used, is that once we find a loadout we like, we're comfortable with it and we stick with it. But again, like with Bastion, the game is kind of encouraging you to use all of these different loadouts, because with every new function you get it after you come across a dead character or a character in the story has died. So these functions all give you and these functions all are loaded with that character's data and their memory. And the more you use it in different slots, the more information you get about those characters and the people of the setting, which is called Cloudbank. So yeah, you're encouraged again, like with Bastion, to experiment, but for narrative purposes. But you can play, I get stuck to a sort of similar build most of the time, maybe just swapping some passives around. But I think it's really cool that, again, they don't really force you into any particular decision, but you can also do it if you want.
That's absolutely right. And we definitely have to get into Cloudbank in the process. Eva?
Yeah, and the narrative that is there with it, it's kind of like, data logs, but it is optional, but what's there is good. And I appreciate the fact that you do have to use it in these different slots to be able to get all of that information. You're going to be missing key parts of Sybil's story, or you're going to be missing parts of the Racer's story or something like that, who gives you Jaunt. I think it's really elegant in that way. And then with the gameplay, if you basically go down to 0 health, you lose your function that has the highest number of points put into it. Right. And you lose it for, I think, basically 2 save points. They call it access points. And so that you can either just go without having one of your function slots, or you can try something different. And I found that even in a New Game Plus, I was still finding really great new combinations that I hadn't quite thought of before. And it made it one of the best replays I've ever done.
Yeah, the way that each function is an NPC and customizing your functions to customize how you play the game, and also giving you sort of a lore reward for doing so, goes into that thing that I was repeating myself saying over and over in the Bastion episode, that Supergiant loves sort of having gameplay, story, and lore and environment sort of interact. Like putting time into one will enhance the value or get you to better understand the others, and that triangle of systems interacting was really powerful in Bastion and Transistor. Let's go let's run it back a little bit. The setting of this area is a sort of a neo-noir futuristic city called Cloudbank, and it's being corrupted by some kind of, I mean, it's definitely not a mystical thing, but it's like some kind of curse or some kind of disaster called the Process, which is not the same as the Calamity in Bastion. The Process is corrupting and transforming the sort of digitally powered cloud bank and turning ordinary people into monsters or ordinary objects into monsters, or twisting them around in a strange way that makes them look turns them into sort of like geometric, like photo negative, warped things. They're not like they're not monstrosities in a fleshy way, but monstrosities in like a in like a digital vector way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they build the city though, don't they? Like they're the reason that Cloudbank, like they're the surveyors, but they're also the reason the Cloudbank essentially exists, and the reason it can part of the reason it can change the way it does. They're from like a connected reality, and they're controlled by part of the city, but I mean, we find out what they're controlled by. It's the Transistor, I think.
Right. The Process is sort of an AI-powered program that makes Cloudbank and is the foundation of Cloudbank, but something corrupts it, which turns parts of Cloudbank and its denizens into monsters or data or some mysterious alternate reality thing. I'm explaining it very poorly, but basically just like the digital. The program, the sort of digital lifeblood that powers Cloudbank, has become corrupted, and every time that Red levels up or the Transistor levels up, and you get a function, it's a person from Cloudbank. So as you gain more skills, if you go into the what basically amounts to a glossary or a codex and look at the different functions, you learn about the people that they used to be, which we've already mentioned to a degree. But the main character, Red, is a singer who loses her voice in an attack. But then the sword used in the attack, the Transistor, Red picks it up and it becomes her guide through Cloudbank, through her adventure. And Red cannot sing anymore, but the Transistor does talk quite a lot and is voiced by Logan Cunningham, the voice of the Stranger from Bastion, and he serves as the sort of the almost like a second person narrator in the throughout the story of the game, because it's not a sort of disembodied, near omniscient voice like in Bastion. It's in its narration, the Transistor is talking to Red and using the second person you, which again, it makes me feel like it's a second person narration, which I think really works here, but is a little bit unusual in storytelling. Oh shoot, there's a wonderful short story about an office tour that is the best, that was written entirely in the second person, and it's my favorite second person story ever written.
I don't know what it is, but I'd love to read that. I may have done.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about the functions is that as you have these NPCs in them, it's kind of their souls that are in there, but they're objectified in a way, and not in like objectified in terms of like a gaze, but objectified as in literal objects. They're things that you're swapping in and out of your sword, who is also your lover, like, or someone that you're very close to. And so I love that in this this possibly / probably artificial world, even the people are objects in some sort of way. And I think that's a really interesting narrative thread that kind of goes through the entire game.
I mean, even the Transistor, he's got a function, hasn't he? Like the person, the man. I think he's just called the man or question mark, isn't he? Like
he's never given a name. We only know him as the Transistor, but we understand that he was once a man.
Yeah, even when we're talking about him, like we call him the Transistor, like because he's not got a name. So yeah, it goes right down to that. But yeah, it's a really interesting narrative thread that people are commodified and people are just things that do things in Cloudbank, and that's what they're known for essentially as well. So yeah.
I remember seeing, I think it was in the No Clip documentary that we keep bringing up. It's very good. You should check it out. That the main character, they'd originally had this boxer, and that the sword was going to be his girlfriend.
Yes.
And there's still some weirdness to having this, embodied protagonist and kind of supporting object in a way, but I'm glad that they chose dead boyfriend sword rather than dead girlfriend sword,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and,
me too.
And slightly more complicated than dead boyfriend sword. It's like dead ex-lover who has a lot of regrets and feels bad for how they broke up sword.
Well, it's never really painted out, is it? Ever?
No,
it's never confirmed what their actual. I mean, they are in a relationship of some kind or have been, but the game never goes. These two were in love, or these two are together. But there's so much implication, and like bouncing off of that, like, does anyone just melt when Logan Cunningham ever just says red or don't let me go or hang in there red? Like the way he says that, I'm like,
I'm like putting in his hands when he says that.
Like, oh, that's so good.
Yeah, it's a tone of maybe not desperation, but a tone of genuine caring that is really communicated strongly. Again, Logan Cunningham, maybe either he or Darren Korb is the front-facing star of Supergiant Games, and I mean they could pick two better people. Holy crap, that must have been a cool apartment to live in 10 years ago.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, anyway, I found the short story I was trying to think of before. It's called Orientation by Daniel Orozco, and it's an office employee on his first day getting a lecture on the office politics and office layout by a veteran employee, entirely told in the second person. It's very short. You can read it in probably 10 minutes, but I read, that's one of those short stories that I sort of read once a year or once every couple of years because it affected me so much. That and but my favorite my favorite book of short stories is Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson, which was made into a very good movie about 20 years ago. So shout out literature, I guess. But back to Transistor. A game told mostly in the second person with the main character is a woman named Red who cannot speak, who has a dead boyfriend sword, who speaks a lot. And a lot of the people in this game are sort of towing the line between objects and people and functions or powers that you keep in your sword. And the one thing about the Transistor is that it's, other than the process itself, it's the one thing that can manipulate the process and damage the process. Like, conventional weaponry won't work on these monsters being created by the corrupted code, but the Transistor has the power to destroy or change them. And talking about functions, let's each mention one or two either functions or a combination of them that you really used a lot or really enjoyed. I'll go first, give you a minute to maybe look up a list or gather your thoughts. After I had gained a couple levels and have sort of figured out the game a lot, of course everyone who can actually make it through to the end of this game uses jaunt at least a little bit, because jaunt is sort of your short dash that is probably used mostly as an escape. And like, even like, oh, I'm kind of surrounded, I need to get out of here. It's like, go into turn mode, jaunt 3 times, now I'm on the other side of the map and can regroup a little bit. But the things I liked using the most was, I think the second or third skill you get is Spark, which is just a little quick bomb toss. And then I combined Spark and Bounce to make the bomb toss make chain explosions. Oh, yeah. And then after I got Load, Load basically just plants a mine that does a tremendous amount of damage. It sort of became attach Bounce to Load, attach something that increases range to Spark, and then basically just drop Load packets everywhere and then set them off with Spark and just make explosions or chain explosions happen all around. And I beat probably a full half to 2/3 of the game doing that. It was a lot of fun. But again, we talked about how the active versus upgrade versus passive slots in this game create an almost limitless number of combinations. What was a combination that either of you particularly enjoyed?
I really love using Cull in turn, just because it's cumbersome and heavy, and in a lot of games, that's not my playstyle at all. But because it has this this turn-based mechanic, I'm like, all right, let's do this. Let's hit with the big boy. And it does so much damage, especially if you have it's a red power-up. I can't remember quite the name of it, but it makes it even more powerful. Using jaunts is really good for getting out of trouble. And then using cloak or shadow in conjunction with another function that I put in the passive slot, which allows you to regain health. So if you messed up in a situation, you got in a little too deep, you jaunt your way out of there, you use cloak, and you hide behind for a little bit. But I don't like doing that too much because it does slow down the pace of the game. So that's really just my last resort sort of strategy.
No. Yeah, I use jaunt all the time for escapes, but attaching a healing function to it to gain some health back. I don't know if I ever figured that out. That's a really good idea.
It is a good one, yeah.
Yes.
Really good.
And I think the cloaking function is called mask. I'm looking at a list of them to help me right now.
Yeah, as you put it in passive, it's mask, but it does other things as well. Because I had mask on. I had it on breach because I used breach for most of the game until I didn't get cull until later on because I know you can as you level up sometimes you get a choice and you can pick what function you go for, and I was just kind of going with my gut. But breach with mask, breach is the second one you get, and it's the long distance, really powerful slow shot, and I put mask adds backstab damage, so I would go up, use crash which stuns, then I would turn on the turn thing and then dash behind them, and then I would shoot them a couple of times. But the other thing I did, because like Eva, I didn't really want to slow down the pace of the game too much, so I used turn kind of regularly, but less so. I had ping, which is the short, the really quick shot, and I put purge on it, which does damage over time.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so good. I think I had Void on it as well, which might be the red one you're thinking of. I think it's red.
Yes.
And I think that enhances the effects of Purge. So I was doing damage over time at pretty high numbers with ping, and then it also helps for the bigger encounters where you've got those. Oh, what are the worms called? Do you know what ones I mean? The ones that heal the enemies or put a damage over time shield on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember enemy names very well in this game, but I remember being really annoyed by the recurring ones in the last section.
Yeah, and so I'd shoot them off really quickly and then focus on whatever the big one was. But yeah, bounce I think was a bit of a given on a passive because it gives you gives you a shield, so that was a good one to have. And I had Spark as a passive as well because it creates a decoy. So if I ever got hit, it would spawn a decoy, and then they would just focus on that for a little bit, and then I could go around and maybe shoot them with ping or breach or something. So, yeah.
Spark, I think, the one that creates a decoy, I thought was help, or
it might be. Although
because Spark, when you use Spark as an upgrade, it usually doubles the attack. Makes two of them.
Oh, I had it on a passive.
Oh, as a passive, okay. As an upgrade, it divides your functions. As a passive, It creates a copy. That's what it is. See, this game is crazy with its gameplay variety.
It's really thinking, given that there's only 16 or however many functions there are, the amount of detail and the fact that there's so many different combinations is kind of amazing, really. You're never going to get everything out of it unless you do a New Game Plus or whatever they call it. It's not called New Game Plus, is it? It's a recursion.
Yep, recursion. And it's really fun in recursion because you can still just keep getting you basically just get duplicates of the functions. So if you don't want to use one of them, but you want to use one of them twice, and you want to use one as an active slot and one as a passive.
So you can trade in unused functions for a copy of one you already have and mess around that way?
You don't even need to trade it in. Just as you're going through recursion, you just get them. So.
Oh, okay. So does it reset your level, or does you just continuing to level beyond 20 or whatever the number is?
You just continue to level, but then you can put in Bastion, you can put modifiers on. So I put on 2 or 3 to make the enemies a little tougher, just so it wasn't a cakewalk. And that made it it was very fun to have that, because then I really had to be thinking outside of the box, and I was frequently losing functions and being like, okay, I have to do a new one. I have to do a new one every, I know, 20 minutes or something, which in another game would have been annoying, but in recursion, I think total it still only took me like 6 hours to do a full playthrough on recursion. So,
and normally this is already not a long game. It's perhaps 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, I think it took me like 9 the first time I played it, though, because I was messing around in the beach.
The sandbox, yeah.
Sandbox,
oh,
yes.
Yeah, the sandbox is a sort of a separate dimension where at a save point you can visit to deal in function-specific challenges or challenges of a specific type, like, your horde mode or your time trial, things like that. And it's, again, Supergiant are the kings of gameplay customization and experience customization, because, I mean, what Eva was just describing with how the recursion system allows you to add challenge or customize your gameplay experience with copies of functions, that is, I didn't know any of that. That is awesome. And like Alana was mentioning two of the functions she used, Void and Purge. Void is basically like a lower enemy defense status, and Purge is more like a poison enemy status. I had those as upgrades to my major skills for almost the entire last act of the game, because I sort of immediately get to, oh, that's what these are for. I have some new gameplay ideas now, but for I should do an actual count so we actually know if it's 16 or not. Yeah, okay, it is 16. So for 16 functions to each have 3 effects, and being able to mix and match them in so many ways is an awesome level of gameplay variety, and that each of them is attached to a NPC that you can learn about in the game's codex. All of that is so cool. and once you figure out Transistor and get comfortable playing it, it is just like going to a candy store of all of these cool gameplay ideas.
It's so brilliant in that, and as opposed to Sollosi, a game we may have played, a couple episodes ago, when we were talking about things that are unified and things that are all fitting together and aren't just assets slapped together to make a game. This game has that. It feels like it has this connective thread that touches every part of it.
It feels so meticulously crafted in how the systems are interact within each other, and how every gameplay idea has a purpose that so the player can sort of make this experience exactly how they want to make it, at least moment to moment gameplay wise, and not necessarily in the story, as opposed to being a game that has a few ideas and then they filled in the empty space with fluff. This is not a fluffy game. This is a game that is just meticulous and beautiful and awesome. Let's talk about the story a little bit. The first boss of the game is a woman named Sybil that's been transformed into a process monster, and Sybil's a member of the Camarada, which is a cabal of 4 people that engineered this process corruption so they can eventually, you learn that they want to sort of destroy Cloudbank and then remake it exactly how they want to make it as its new sort of ruling council.
When everything changes, nothing changes, right?
Right. But things don't go as planned, and now we're in the middle of this disaster. And Sybil's sort of a normal enemy, like just a heavily armed and armored one that's maybe she's a quarter or a third of the way into the game. But when she enters your transistor, and you can I forget what function she gives you, and you can look at you can look at her backstory. It seems that she was in love with Red, and intended to kill your lover that's in the transistor now, and things go badly, and now she's sort of acting out in rage as a result of being absorbed by the process. And it's like she's an almost faceless NPC that is only, she's the woman in the group of 4 bad guys. and just takes on layers of a much more interesting role when you go into the transistor and sort of look into the faces behind the functions.
Right, yeah. And another thing that's really interesting about Sybil is that I think she's the only one of the Camerata, or certainly one of the only ones of the bosses. She's the only one that has a vocal piece as her boss music. It's In Circles, which is one of the 5 or 6 songs written by Darren Korb and sung by Ashley Barrett. And the song itself goes through the emotions that Sybil and Red were having when Sybil was... Like, the song is ultimately about Sybil's unrequited love for Red, and Red, the really fun thing about the music in this game is that in-game, Red wrote all of these songs. So The Spine, We All Become One, Paper Boats, Signals, she wrote all of them.
Paper Boats is my favorite. Guaranteed.
Paper Boats is great.
Yeah, guaranteed Paper Boats will be either the opener or the ender of this episode. I haven't decided yet. But, and also, to be a little bit more specific, Red is a nightclub singer, and the sort of future noir aesthetic of Transistor sort of makes her in a way she's sort of the femme fatale, the lady in red, and the Transistor is the detective hero, but with those roles not exactly flipped, but warped a little bit, because just because of like the dimly lit colors of the city. I think they wanted to communicate a little bit of a noir film feeling.
Yeah, it's cyber noir. It's 1920s, isn't it? Like,
right.
Even the music carries that like 1920s French style with like the heavy synth electro pop at times. It's so cool. Yeah.
Both the visual flair and the audio flair of that. What kind of made up words are we going to use to describe it? Neo noir, post rock.
I had it written down. I don't have it in front of me. What Darren's called it?
Future lounge. I feel like Darren Korb sort of evolves different genres of music with every game soundtrack he composes. Visually and musically, this game is an absolute stunner. It is. I actually did own this soundtrack before the replay of Transistor and had been listening to it for a couple of years. So before I finally got around to finishing it a few months ago, I knew the soundtrack better than the game by a large margin.
Oh yeah, me too. But yeah, In Circles, like in the actual lyrics, like Sybil is supposed to, because it talks about a fly on the wall flying in circles, just trying to land. I see you hurting. I do what I can. It's supposed to be Sybil like trying to connect with Red, and Red trying to help her, but Red obviously not like returning these feelings. So like the first half of the song is like Red being aware of this infatuation and trying to calm her down, and the second half of it is supposed to be Sybil falling into a depression, and then Red like tries to give some advice to her. But yeah, what I find really interesting about the lyric songs in particular for this game is that even though the Transistor is kind of the second-hand narrator, all these songs that Red has written, they are basically telling the story of the game, all of them, at different points, because What You All Become is the song that plays when you have the flashback, when you find out what happened to Red and the man, and it goes through the whole, like, she's singing and then he gets stabbed, and it talks about stab pains and wounds and things, and then it talks about them running away together with the Transistor. So it's so interesting. I don't know, I love this soundtrack so much. It just does so many interesting things.
It's an incredible soundtrack, and it's just, Bastion was already a pretty great soundtrack, as we had talked about before. This one's just, I think it's even better, and it a lot of things in Transistor just feel like a step up, but not quite in the ways that you expect a lot of times. Like, the design of the world is more simplified, and I think it's still a very colorful game, but it's not as vibrantly colorful. It's got more of a luster about it, rather than just kind of a tropical sensibility. And there's so many things about this game that are that feel more revolutionary than evolutionary over Bastion. And I think it's a really brave game in that aspect as well. And for a 2014 game, it also has kind of more. It's quiet about it, but it has more queer characters than you'd expect too, because you have Sybil, who who seems to be in love with Red. You have two of the antagonists, the Kendrils, who are
who are two men who are married partners.
Right, exactly. And there's one of the functions that really doesn't get talked about at all, that I didn't even notice the first playthrough. Bailey uses she, her pronouns, but if you look in the function, it actually says gender X instead of M or F for it, which I thought was very interesting as well. So I think they're trying to say that Bailey is a non-binary woman, and it's really cool to see that.
Right, yeah. I didn't even notice that. It might have been because I'm missing like one function, I think, so it might be that one that I'm missing. But yeah, it is really progressive in a quiet way that I really appreciate. Like, it's like this is how I would like it. I wish we were like this, like now. Like, I wish we didn't, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I wish this was the point we were at consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that now I'm saying this as a heteronormative male. So, I mean, you might need to empty the whole salt shaker on this instead of just taking a grain. But I think that I always like seeing normalized queerness in media, like something like a trans character or any kind of LGBT character, but not having their queerness framed as a struggle or as a tragedy, but just as part of them that's normal and accepted. Which is why Alana, this is a game that you and I both love. Oh my God, why can't I think of it?
Time Spinner?
Time Spinner, yeah. Like all of the character relationship stuff in Time Spinner just like made tears come to my eyes for just how lovely it was.
Cool.
And for multiple characters to be NB or in a non-hetero relationship, and just have that be a normal part of the game and not something that's dark or a struggle or a problem is just great. And they don't draw attention to it in a way that is like lighting a flare in the sky. They draw attention to it by just having it be a normal part of the world. And that's something I always love to see. And Eva, you were talking about the aesthetic of this game versus Bastion and referring to Bastions as tropical. And I think that like Bastion, I think that's sound, and Bastion is just like trying to be colorful and always throwing combinations of colors at you, while Transistor is more like, it's like the Edward Hopper painting Nighthawks, where it's a scene at night with bright colors illuminating neon signs, but like what isn't lit by a neon sign is sort of dark and murky in a way that's. It's so pretty. This is a very beautiful game to behold, even in the end game where the process is sort of taking over, and there's a lot of stark blacks and whites and angled lines as the color palette. It's visually an extremely successful game. But talking about successful visuals, maybe my favorite part of the game, or scratch that. My favorite part of the game, my two favorite parts of the game happen at the very end, but my other favorite part that happens in the middle is just a visually striking boss battle. A large section of the game after the Sybil boss fight, you're going up a building because you know that the Camerata are headquartered at the top floor, and you're being accosted by an enemy called the Spine, which appears to be like a giant worm or serpent or monster that I had to ask you of this before we started recording to figure out what the Spine was. We think it's an entire building, or maybe like a subway train or something that had been transformed by the process into a giant monster. And so you're fighting segments of the Spine or like eventually the head of the Spine, like a giant monster battle or a kaiju battle, or a knight fighting a dragon in multiple stages in a way that is so impressive. It is maybe the coolest extended stretch of the game. The Spine is amazing, and its music theme is cool too.
Yeah, it's really. I mean, it's really terrifying when it pops up because the screen shakes a bit when it hits, kind of like the Gators and Bastion, and it's I mean, it's terrifying. You're not sure which direction it's going to come from, and it's kind of unknowable in a way because it just doesn't. It only has a few distinct visual elements about it. It's very simplistic in its design, which I think makes it all the more terrifying because it's abstracted like that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's so huge that you only see a tiny piece of it at a time. So in a way, it is unfathomable or unknowable, and you're basically going up a skyscraper as this giant serpentine monster is coiling around the skyscraper. It's an amazing visual effect for, I would say, a few connected stages and then the boss fight at the head.
Yeah, definitely. You go inside it, don't you? I think that's a really cool thing after you beat it. You go inside it to actually, like, stab it in the heart. That's another reference pulled out of The Spine, the song that you were referring to, which is probably my favourite song, The Spine. I don't know, I think it's because where it first plays is when you go to the poster in the plaza, and then the transistor is like, Red, look, it's you on the wall, and then they tell you what happened, and it's like, oh, we took something of theirs, and I just had chills in that moment. And then when I heard it play again a little bit later on, just before this boss fight, I was like, so this is what it's referring to. The Spine as well, because it's such a large process, and I can only assume it's because it's a process, it screws up the transistor quite a bit, and the voice starts slurring a lot, and it's a genuinely really uncomfortable moment because, you know, you're being guided by this voice or being accompanied by this voice. But in those moments, I was thinking, well, what happens if the voice stops? And, like, he sounds genuinely terrified. He sounds drunk as well, but that's kind of the point of it. But yeah, like, it's just such a visually impressive creature. And if you beat the Spine and if you go into the sandbox straight afterwards, the transistor says, well, I hope there's only one of them. And later on, there are more. In the bit where you leave, I think it's Bracket Towers, after you've met Grant and Asher Kendrill, once you leave the building, as you're going through the air, there's loads of them, like, floating in the background. So you can only assume that this is, you know, that's the hint that the process have really started to take over, because they've probably taken over a bunch of large buildings. So yeah, it's such a cool moment when you fight that boss. It's so awesome.
And after you fight the boss, you get to the top floor of Bracket Tower, and you see that Royce and Asher Kendrill. I'm sorry, no, Asher and Grant Kendrill. Royce is a different guy. Asher and Grant Kendrill have sort of, in horror of what they've done, and maybe also for fear of repercussion, they've committed suicide together. Which is, you know, a dark, unsettling moment. That you don't get a boss battle for it, but is the moment that sort of takes you into the final act of the game.
I was going to say, like, climbing that tower is really interesting, because as you're climbing up it, you have to take loads of, like, terminal, like, voicemails from, I think it's Asher, isn't it? And I keep wanting to say Thanatos because it's the same voice actor. Yeah, like, he talks you through, he's, like, delivering you messages and going, like, oh, I'm up at the top of the tower. And he starts off a little bit antagonistic, but the further up you get, the more he comes to realise that actually, you know, oh my God, what have I done, kind of thing. And it's a really interesting thread of, like, the, like, messages. And you reply to each of these as well, like, just saying, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you lying to me, kind of thing. And yeah, it's very, very cool. I love going up that tower. It was so interesting.
And not just in the tower, but throughout the game, you find terminals there will be things like personal emails from NPCs or citywide announcements telling people to evacuate for the process or not to worry about the process, or a lot of it is, you know, evidence of a cover up. But there's a lot of game, I should say, lore interest in all of the optional writing that you find scattered throughout the game. It really shapes Cloudbank into an extremely interesting setting. But the final act of the game, after you find the Kendrills dead, you're chasing down Royce Brackett, the sort of the technical mastermind behind the Camerata, into part of the city that is really completely wiped by the process. It feels almost skeletal in how it's black and white. It's only in blacks and whites, and it's sort of empty feeling after Cloudbank is so beautiful and colorful for most of the game. And it culminates in a boss fight against Royce that is one of my other favorite parts of the game. I am so excited to talk about this. You sort of you realize that if you set the transistor in a certain place, you can halt the process corruption and maybe start to rebuild the world. But the transistor sucks Red and Royce into itself. And then you find yourself in a sort of a void space with both Red and Royce wielding their own transistor, and it's a transistor wielder versus transistor wielder battle in which Royce can even use turn and all of the same processes that you can use, and it is so cool.
It's oh my god! And I think he starts off the fight by saying like, "Mind if I go first?" or something, and
immediately goes into a turn,
exactly. And you're like, well, what do you mean? And then he, immediately clicks into that, and even playing through it a second time, I knew he was going to do this, and my jaw still dropped because you go through this entire game where no one else is using the turn. You have this sense of superiority over everything. The enemies might be tough, but they can't just pause time like you can. And here, he's getting the jump on you with your own powers. It's so satisfying. I love it.
It is by far the coolest encounter from a gameplay perspective in the game. I think the spine is more visually striking, but the boss fight against Royce was so great that it's like, oh man, I know this is special because it's the final boss, but I sort of wish there was like 4 of these in the game because it was so cool.
Well, yeah, just like using your own weapons, using your own tools against you is like one of the best things any video game can do, I think.
Oh yeah.
Like, you're so used to what you've got, and then all of a sudden someone's got exactly the same thing as you. It's like Shadow Link, isn't it, in Ocarina of Time?
I was thinking of the handful of Dante versus Virgil fights we've gotten over multiple Devil May Cry games. It's like
that's a more appropriate reference for me. Yeah.
I mean, it's cool fighting a bunch of giant demons, but it's like there's a different intimacy and a different level of cool when you're fighting someone that's the same size as you with the same or similar powers as you. It's an entirely different dynamic.
But there's so much at stake as well, because, I mean, by this point, I think don't you? Because in the area beforehand, Royce was following you around as like a terminal, wasn't he? He was like guiding you through the processed area, and he tells you, it might be somebody else, I don't know. He tells you that you can't get the man out of the sword, like your partner, your lover or whatever. He's trapped in there forever. There's no way you'll ever get him out. He's gone to what I'm assuming is like heaven, but they call it the country, don't they? Or like the equivalent of the afterlife or something. And
it's like he's been made into disembodied data and can never be reloaded into a person again.
That's right, yeah. That's a good way of putting it. But yeah, so you've got all this built-up anger that you've been brought through the whole game to think, oh, okay, I'm going to save the person and get Red back to her normal life, but she's not going to do that. And now she's being given the ability to go, well, if you win this fight, well, you have the power to change everything at your own will, essentially. So yeah, she's got to make that decision, and it's just such a powerful, really good fight.
And how they kind of get there with the Camerata's aims, I mean, the Camerata, it's difficult to kind of parse this out, and even after a couple of playthroughs, I still find myself with questions as to what exactly the story was trying to say. But it's really hinging on what exactly democracy is and how to kind of carry that out. Early on in the game, the Transistor makes a note when they're at a terminal that there's a vote, and it says like, I know, blue skies or partly cloudy or something. And he goes, well, rain's not even on the ballot. And it's like the leaders, it hadn't even occurred to them that maybe some people do like rain. And as you're walking through this area with Brackett, and he's kind of just talking at you, just repeating things, talking at you, you realize that he just could not keep up with popular whim. He wasn't really he was trying to keep in step with what people were trying to say and what they wanted out of Cloudbank, and he felt he couldn't really do that. And the Kendrills felt the same way. Grant Kendrill was a very experienced politician who, it said, he held basically every different position that there was, despite whatever he may have personally wanted. And it really plays with that idea of how to function as people with ideologies in a democracy that I think is extremely relevant.
And
Yeah.
I agree, but I didn't think of this necessarily as a democracy. I thought of CloudBank being like a shareware city or
right.
a wiki city. Like it's a space that, powered by this technology called the process, is built and rebuilt and shaped by the input of everyone. And the Camarada, like many a supervillain, wanted to remake it in their own image, or and maybe they're guided by some twisted ideology that makes sense only to them. But I think like Royce being a programmer or an engineer, wanted more elegance and structure to the city, and Grant, maybe being a greedy politician of sorts, believes he knows better than the common man how to run a city, and like those ideas sort of running together created the Camarada and the idea to rebuild the city to their specification, which is again, that's some supervillain stuff and some oligarch / despot versus democracy rule of the people idea. But I thought of it as, like true shareware versus one stubborn programmer who believes that he is the only one with the answer.
Yeah, there's a quip, isn't there? Because one of the terminals, you can change the colour of the sky, can't you? And you see the effect of it in the sandbox. I think you can change it to like green, red, purple, or blue or something. And I think that's really, really cool. And I think one of the Camerata, and I can't remember who it is, makes a like comment about that. There's like, oh, they can change it. Even if they can do everything, they can change whatever they want, even right down to the colour of the sky. And actually on the thing with the rain terminal, and I can't remember whether it's before you go and fight Royce or after when you've beaten him, there is another terminal and you can make it rain. And I'm annoyed I can't remember the specifics, because it would be really interesting.
I don't remember that either.
Yeah, it would be really interesting, because obviously where you said, Eva, like the terminal bit where the transistor's like, well, there's no option to have rain. Now there is. Like, who's responsible for that? Is that because you have the transistor and you can, as they say in the game, you have the brush, the CloudBank is the canvas, essentially. Do you have the power to do that now, or is that something that somebody else has programmed in? I wish I'd double check that, actually.
Right.
And after you beat Royce, it doesn't show you necessarily rebuild all of CloudBank. The Camarada is gone. The monsters of the process seem gone, and Red either restores the city or at least restores part of it. I'm not 100% sure. But the real moment of drama is she walks down a sort of a pathway. It's beautiful and colorful and sort of like fitting more in with the CloudBank of old. And then again to the protests of the man inside the transistor, she stabs herself with the sword and then enters the sword. And the final scene is her and a man shown either in profile or from the rear, sort of standing in a large meadow, which is the presumed country or the void within the transistor. And so like, rather than rebuild the world or rule the world or stay in the world, she's joining him in there. And that's I don't love endings that end in suicide, but this is a very emotional, tragic final note to end on.
She chose rain.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, the refrain that kind of kept going through the game, repeated, was "the sky looks blue because we wanted to." And Red I see it as Red kind of rejecting that, and kind of with having this power after beating the final boss, she's presented a terminal with a binary option, and she chooses neither. And she chooses to make her own way free from whatever the Camarada had thought she would or what they wanted her to do.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, it's never going to be the same anyway, because all of those people are in the transistor dead, aren't they? So it's like she doesn't really have... even though she's got this blank canvas to do whatever she wants with, like, she's lost everything. Like, she's lost the people of the city, she's lost her voice, she gets her voice back once she takes the sword. I mean, I could see it coming, probably right from the start, that she was gonna commit suicide. Probably because I immediately got the assumption that there was some kind of relationship in there, and I thought, like, well, surely he can't get out of the sword. But I do think it still made me cry, and it is really interesting for the reasons that Eva said. Like, she's rejecting this whole, like, this power and everything, you know, everything she's been given for her own choice, which is, you know, what she wanted, just to go back to normal with presumably her partner and go to the country. And she does get a line of dialogue as well. She gets one small hi.
That's it. and that's all she gets. And having that agency, I was listening to a Watch Out for Fireballs podcast, and someone had emailed into the show talking about kind of how there's this idea of, like, killing labels that's brought up, and how the Kendrils kind of make that. And what the person had said in it was, what happens when white, male, rich queers dream about killing labels and making a better world, but forgetting about the rest of us? And it feels like Red taking that back and being like, you're not going to forget about me because I'm able to take control of my life again. My voice is back and I can do whatever I want with it.
Yeah, pretty much. There's a really interesting line in her bio, actually, that I remember reading. I misread it the first time, and it says that she never intended for her voice to be either, like, cause a rebellion or cause, like, problems. But this is her, like, grabbing that voice back and saying, no, you know what, I'm going to use my voice to do what I want to do, kind of thing.
I don't know if I want to say open-ended necessarily, but it's an ending, or the ending of Transistor and the themes of Transistor invite a lot of interesting questions. Similar to the end of Bastion, that I'm not sure what to think about this ending, other than I think it's just so beautiful and sad. In the way of a lot of great a lot of great movies about loss.
It is, and I'm glad she got her freedom in her way, in her own choice, I suppose. But yeah, it is very sad the way that she had to do it.
Do you know what movie this reminds me of? And it's also a play. And forgive me if you haven't seen or seen it before. There's I've only seen the movie version, but it has Barbara Stanwyck and William Holden in it, who are a very, very handsome couple in the 1940s, called Golden Boy, and it is completely unrelated to the anime Golden Boy. I'm just going to throw that out there. Going to throw that out there immediately. But it's about a man who's a brilliant violinist and also a brilliant prize fighter, and he wants to, and like after he wins his first fight, he wants to settle down and be a violinist after he got some money, but he gets mixed up with the mob and is encouraged to continue fighting and be a musician later in his life. But he breaks a hand in one fight, making him unable to play the violin ever again. But that gets him sort of sinking deeper in with the mob and in with boxing, and he makes a lot of money, but after accidentally killing someone in the ring, being definitely not having a career anymore and not having a music career anymore, eventually goes off for a drive and dies in a car accident, implying that it was an intentional suicide by car. So it's just like losing your power of music and being forced into a struggle with fighting and then ultimately losing everything. I don't know. That's a noir movie from the late 30s or early 40s, and that was just the vibe that I felt from this game. Just like a very specific visual and musical idea that ultimately results in sort of everyone losing and finding peace that way. It's dark and sad and weird, but I really like it. And it's, I don't think the anime Golden Boy is based on that play. Nope, don't think so.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay, well, we'll fact check you on that afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, but the movie version with Barbara Stanwyck and William Holden is really good. But okay, if I'm talking about noir films from the 1930s, maybe it's time to end the episode. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us on our Transistor journey. This is a really, really good game. I am not sure if I like it more than Bastion or not, because I think I liked the weapon selection and the basics of action in Bastion a little more than the turn system in Transistor. But Transistor is such a beautiful, elegant game in other ways that I'm not calling Bastion the winner either. I think both of these games are excellent and worth playing. But for some of the same reasons and some different reasons. But either way, it comes highly recommended. I am thrilled that I've played Bastion that I played Transistor through to the end for the first time earlier this year and had so much fun with it. And thank you so much, Eva and Alana, for joining me and talking about it. I am always down to talk about cool, interesting video games with my friends, and today is not an exception in the least.
Yeah,
I'm glad to be here.
Great. Yeah, me too.
And I'm excited to continue with more of Supergiant Games Month, because this is my first time playing Pyre, and I'm I don't know, maybe halfway through, but having a hell of a time with it. Another game that is musically and visually brilliant and fitting with the Supergiant aesthetic. But we will, I think all three of us will be back to talk about Pyre next week, and I could not be more excited to do it. I still have a couple hours to knock out in there, but so far I'm very encouraged by Pyre, especially everyone's favorite gremlin, Tizo.
Oh, he's an
Tizo.
perfect.
Tizo is the real MVP. And there will be some Tizo gushing in 1 week from now when we talk about Pyre. But also coming in December, we have our year in review episode that we hold every year, where we're going to talk about the games and game experiences of 2020, and that's always fun to record, and that's coming right after Pyre. And in January, we have all 4 episodes planned out. We're doing 2 episodes on Baten Kaitos, which won a listener poll that we held right around episode 250, and also selfishly on this podcast, I like doing spoiler casts of my favorite recent games that I've played, and I'm going to hold up that tradition in January. We're having 1 episode dedicated to Yakuza Like a Dragon, the artist formerly known as Yakuza 7, and also an episode on Hades, continuing Supergiant Games Month with a January echo. Hades and Yakuza, I'm not sure which one is first and which one is second, but they were my 2 favorite games of 2020, and I cannot wait to talk about both of them in early January. Alana, I think we've talked about Hades a lot together, and it's time to share it with our listening audience.
I mean, it might have to be a maturity tag.
Yeah, I think I might have to do the mature tag on definitely Hades, maybe also Yakuza 7. Just because there's a lot of profanity and a lot of punching dudes in the face in that game.
Am I going to have to protect my virgin ears if I listen to that episode?
No comment. But listeners, if you want to comment, the best way to do so is to email retro@rpgfan.com. I read that email address every week and respond to every email I receive. You can also comment on RPG Fans message boards, visit the Facebook page, our Instagram page, our Twitter account, our Discord server, our Twitch channel, something streaming almost every day on Twitch. And there's also 3 other fine podcasts on RPGFan.com. There is Phoenix Edge, which is also weekly and mostly focused on current events, plus Random Encounter about randomness and Rhythm Encounter about rhythmness. Shout out our listener, Lucas Green. You can also review any of those 4 podcasts, including Retro Encounter, on iTunes, Google Play, or whatever podcast listening venue you use. We love feedback. You give us feedback. Reviews help more people finding the podcast. Please review. But in case you want to review us as people, which is a dark implication of social media, where can you find us on social media? Starting with you, Alana.
I mean, I think people probably do that anyway. But if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Alana Hagues. You can find me on the RPG Fan Discord as well as Alana. Or if you want to email me, you can at alanah@rpgfan.com.
And Eva.
You can find me on RPG Fan's general social media accounts on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can find me on my personals, usually on Twitter and Instagram as @EvaLease.
And listeners, if you want to find me on social media, the easiest way to do so is Twitter. I am @TheRealMonsoon, most of the time @Evoker4Dogs, at other times way too active on both of those accounts. And I am also considerably less active, but still present on the RPG Fan Discord as Monsoon Mike. Thank you, good night, and good luck.
Seconds march into the past, moments pass, just like that, they're gone. The river always finds the sea, so helplessly, like you find me. We are paper boats floating on a stream. We'll never be apart. I will always find you, like it's written in